Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's episode of the Career Creator Podcast. Today, our guest is Dr. Rhea Horton. How are you, Rhea?
I'm great. How are you, Rachel?
I'm doing well. And we actually had the pleasure of working together a few years ago. So excited to have another guest who I know personally on the podcast and hear more about her career story and the different twists and turns. I would say, like me, she's a professional career pivoter. The art of the pivot, she's mastered.
Yep.
So tell us more. What did you study to get there?
Of course. So my background is in counseling psychology. So I have my master's and PhD in counseling psychology. But as I was going through the program, I realized I do care about people, love making connections and supporting them to be their best selves. But I wanted to do so in a corporate environment. So that was actually the first pivot that I had to make, was figuring out how to transfer my skill set to do so more in the corporate HR world when I hadn't had that exposure up until then.
Okay, and that's when our paths cross. So, yeah, how did you communicate your skill set to people when they're looking at your resume and saying, "Oh, you have a PhD in this other area"? How did you translate those skills into the HR and corporate world?
Yeah, it was a challenge because definitely people saw it, almost was as if people saw my education as a hindrance. Oh, she has a PhD in this, or she's going for a PhD in this. She must wants to be a psychologist. She doesn't really understand what HR is and what it's about. And I had to really rely on my relationships that I've been building and networking that I've done up until then. I also was able to, through some networking, complete an internship with a consulting firm that focused on human capital. And so that's almost kind of like the best marriage, if you will, of skill sets, because a lot of the professionals in the office were organizational psychologists or former counseling psychologists. And so I really leaned on that experience and then spoke to a lot of the transferable skills that I've received, whether it was program development or coaching. And I had to even use different verbiage so that others on the corporate side could see, okay, she does have a skill set that we can leverage and use.
Okay, that's a great idea. So, looking at transferable skills, and when we say that, that just means skills that will transfer from what you've done before to this new thing that you're doing. Because even if you don't have the same title, oftentimes you're doing a lot of the same things or using the same skills. It's just communicating. And I love what you pointed out. You have to communicate it in a way that the person understands. So, even if you did the same thing, you might call it something different in your old field. So you have to know the language of where you're going. So, how did you know that language?
I did a lot of studying of job descriptions, quite frankly. That is the best place to go. They have all of those keywords that they would say, other terminology that's in there. So if there was a terminology in there of, let's say, individual development plan, at first I had no clue what that was. Once I understood and Googled and researched what that was, I was like, oh, that's a treatment plan. So in my counseling
Mm,
world, that's a treatment plan.
yeah.
But an IDP is what is called in the corporate world. So when I talked about my experiences, for instance, developing treatment plans, I changed the terminology to IDPs, and then people understood what I was doing.
That is so great because if you came up to me, yeah, and said, I make treatment plans, I don't think I'd make that connection in my brain automatically of like, oh, well, that's just like IDPs and that makes sense and it
Mm-hmm.
translates. So you had to tell the story of how those skills translate and use the language of the field that you're going to. So you were able to translate treatment plan to IDP. That is an amazing example. I love that example. And I like too that you leverage job descriptions because all of us have access to job descriptions. You can go on LinkedIn and see thousands
Yes.
upon thousands of job
Yes.
descriptions. It is free, anyone can access it. So if you are looking at going into a new field, a great place to start is going to the job descriptions for the roles that you're interested in and looking at what are the common words on there? What are the common phrases? And going to research that. That's a great place to start for people.
Absolutely. Another aspect I would add that was helpful was absolutely leveraging, again, the network.
Mm.
I started out literally not knowing anything about consulting psychology or industrial organizational psychology because that wasn't what my program was focusing on. And when I finally even understood the term, or there was a industry that I thought that I wanted to enter into, I started asking around in my program, does anyone even know someone who might have once been a counseling psychologist and transitioned over into more of a consulting psychology role? And thankfully, there was one professor in my program who said, actually, we have one former class student or a student graduated some time ago, but she's now doing this work. Let me connect you. And that literally started the pathway of me connecting to more and more people. And when I would present to them, well, I have a counseling psychology background, they're really not going to understand what it is that I do or see the value that I bring. When I would kind of poo poo on myself, they're like, no, 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 no. This is how you have to present it. So they
Yeah.
definitely help to lay that foundation of no, no, no. You have to understand terminology. You have to understand how to pivot your skill set. They were the one who helped me to understand even the concept of transferable skills in the first place.
And that's a good point because a lot of times we take ourselves out of the race. If you're talking about your skills and saying, oh, well, I don't really know this area. Well, I did it over here, but it's not the same thing. Then you're telling people you're not qualified for the job when you probably are. So
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
yeah, like you need to come in and be confident that yeah, I have not done this exact thing, but I've done this other thing and here's how it's very similar and I'm willing to learn what I don't know.
Exactly. And then making sure that people understand you have the capability of learning whatever that new additional skill set to make it applicable within that industry. If they have the confidence that you can grasp whatever the terminology is or the topic, then that helps you as well.
Yeah, and a big part of that you said was talking to people about it and them, telling you what to focus on or how it could sound like, what it could look like. Were you used to asking people for help? Is that a skill you've had to learn? Because I know that's something I've had to learn and have struggled with at times, that asking for help. So, what has that been like for you?
It's been a journey. It's not something that I am used to doing even currently. I've just grown in the mindset of understanding that I will make my life easier if I ask for help. But at that time, I think I spent maybe about 6 months or so trying to investigate where I thought I would land career wise and feeling like I wasn't successful at all. And so that's when I gave up, so to speak, and was like, okay, well, let me ask someone else because I can't be the only person thinking of this, concept in my mind that it exists. It has to in some capacity. So it's been an evolution of really understanding that when I'm stuck, when I have done my due diligence, which is important for me, I want to feel as though I've done my due diligence so that I can at least go to someone when I'm asking for help to say, okay, this is what I've learned so far. I feel as though I'm missing some components. Are you able to aid or assist? And then I find that that reception is the best that I can ever receive because people understand, okay, she's really looking into it or she's really interested. And then I find that they tend to be even more invested in my growth or my learning because they understand that the content that they're going to share with me will actually be put to use.
That's a great point. Doing your homework and helping yourself. People are more excited to help you if they see that you're helping yourself. You're doing the work. You're serious about this.
Exactly. So I'm appreciative for those connections, but as an introvert, it definitely takes intentionality and effort for me to one, make those connections and understand that I'm also bringing value to the conversation by connecting in the first place. That was something I struggled with in the very beginning and also what held me back from asking for help. I was thinking, well, I just want to, learn from them, everything they have to learn. I have nothing to add and this is a waste of their time. Maybe I should just keep studying and trying to figure it out on my own. But once I got over that hurdle and realized that by engaging with someone coming new into the industry, they learn a lot more or learning or hearing about my experiences, because my experiences may be different from their own. Their understanding of a different background, a different person's experiences will help to improve their practice and the work that they do. So there is value in reaching out, asking for help, sharing of your background, because it gives back to the person who's helping you.
It's a mutually beneficial relationship situation. And you can let me know what I found most people that you reach out to are happy to help and talk to you. And sometimes they'll even say, thanks for asking me that question. It's good for people to reflect on their careers and on why they made certain decisions and how they think about things because in our day-to-day roles, we're not always slowing down to look at that bigger picture. So, have you found reception to be pretty positive overall when you reach out?
Yes, absolutely. Because of the reasons that you mentioned, when someone loves what they do, they love to share it with others in whatever that capacity looks like volunteering, mentoring, or just a regular coffee chat. And so for them, like you said, it's an opportunity for them to reflect. I think in conversations that I've had, especially in the beginning, I'll ask certain questions that may have been, let's say, very introductory or rudimentary for them, but it also had them reflect back to a time where they used to ask the exact same questions and
Yeah.
realizing how far they have come. And in that retrospect, be able to impart a wisdom on to me in that moment that they wished that they had. I've heard that a lot. Like, if I was in your position, knowing what I know now, I would have done this. I've heard that
Mm.
time and time again. And I think people absolutely find value in, like you said, taking time to one, give back and pour into someone coming up in the industry. And then also just recognizing how far they have come.
Yeah, that's a really good point because we all are beginners at
Mm-hmm.
at some stage in our
Yep.
career in our life. I call myself the forever beginner. I'm always a beginner at something in some area of my life at all times. So people relate to that beginner experience, that beginner mindset. And you successfully did. You transitioned into corporate HR, which I'll say HR is a lot of different things. You know, there's specialist roles, there are generalist roles. So I feel like within that space, a lot of times people transition and may not know exactly what they want to do. So it often will take a few different companies, a few different roles, a few different tries to get right in what area do you really want to focus on. So tell us about your journey to finding your area that you really love or finding what works for you.
Yeah, I love that you asked that. Thank you. So, when I entered into HR, I did some work within talent development and loved it. I was like, this is exactly where I need to be and want to be. At the time, the headcount, however, or the place within the company where they could actually pay my salary and they needed support was elsewhere. And so I ended up in a program manager role, which actually leaned heavily on skills that I have that while I enjoy them, they can become draining at some point. And so the role evolved over time where it became very operational, which is on the far end of where I like to be. I wanted to be more people facing and more strategic overall versus operational and executing the work. And so I went ahead and left that job. And in between that transition period, thought about what is it that I really enjoyed about the work and tried to find a role that had more of those elements, one of which was the coaching element. I really enjoyed coaching.
Okay, so you talked about being good at something and enjoying it, but still getting drained from it. So I wanted to spend a second there because what I found is some activities, even if you love to do them, you're giving more energy out than you're getting it. So it's like a deficit. You're depleting energy throughout that interaction, even if it's enjoyable. Then you have other interactions where it's enjoyable and they're adding energy. Then you have things that you don't enjoy and they're draining your energy. So, how have you approached, managing your energy, knowing that even things you enjoy sometimes are energy depleting? So, you have to refill in some way.
Yes, I think it definitely took some time for me to learn myself. And I actually think it's more of the pace of society in general is very go, 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 go. And so you don't have time to just kind of sit, observe, and take in how am I responding in this moment? How do I feel in this moment? What contributed to that, good or bad? And so it took the time for me to, after I left the role, to actually do a full reflection. While I was in the role, I realized I definitely gained enjoyment from aspects of the role. So it was the coaching of new hires. I liked a bit of the onboarding process. I enjoyed meeting with the managers, having performance conversations. What I didn't enjoy was a lot of the tactical, operational work that was assigned to it. I didn't necessarily enjoy putting out fires, conflict that will pop up that I felt like was out of my control. I like to have things in control. And so those aspects were more draining for me. And as the role evolved, some of those actions that required more energy from me were increasing in the amount. And so it was requiring more and more energy. And like you said, at some point it was depleting. And then at some point I was definitely at a deficit. That was when I absolutely did not enjoy the role. I wasn't happy to go into work. I wasn't happy thinking about work. I was annoyed when certain people will email me. So at that time, I knew a change was needed. And then when I was able to completely like detach from the work and reflect, I took into consideration those elements. Okay, what is it that I'm good at? And then out of those things that I'm good at, what is it that I actually enjoy that I look forward to doing? I don't mind doing if it's early in the morning or late at night, or I'm willing to step in and volunteer extra time to do. What are some of those actions? And that's what helped me to understand what brings me joy, gives me energy versus what depletes me versus what might kind of leave me on status quo, not feeling either or.
Yeah, and I love the two questions you ask because I think we often stop at what am I good at? But what do you enjoy is just as important because if you're good at it and you hate it, it drains you, you're going to be burnt out.
Exactly.
So you looked at your skill sets and realized coaching is something I really enjoy and I'm good at it. So what did you do after discovering coaching was an area where you really wanted to focus?
Yeah. So I also evaluated who I wanted to do it for. So once you figure out what is it you want to do, then I think it is helpful to think about who do you want to do it for? What type of impact do you want to have? And that's what led me to, so to speak, my roots of going back to working with undergraduate and graduate students. And that's something that I've done during my program, my counseling program. And I was like, well, I'm familiar with it. I know that that is a generation that I would love to impart wisdom on, help them to identify a career path or at least a starting career path that best fits them, that gives them energy and helps them, at least have a nice springboard into their career. And so then I was like, okay, well, I'm just going to go ahead and transition into working back in higher ed.
Okay, so you went from your PhD program, corporate HR, higher ed, coaching specifically in higher ed. What was that experience like? Was it what you expected? Was it different?
It was, I think, what I expected. And I was very excited about how hungry students are for knowledge. And as we talked about, it put me back in that mindset of where I was at that time of my life and how hungry I was for knowledge as well. And will hang on to that person's word and okay, so and so said that I need to do this. Let me research this. If I need to do this next, then I will do that. They're very, or they can be very step and process oriented, which works well for my mind because that's how I view the world often. And so I thought it was wonderful. I enjoyed making the connections. Again, being more on the introverted side, I like valuable connections, smaller connections. So doing things one on one, that was like easy time for me. It wasn't difficult or challenging or anything like that. I love the conversations, the questions that they asked. Even if it was a question I didn't know, then I would do whatever research. And so that helped me because I learned more and then I could turn around and help them. What I would say was a new experience about working in higher ed is really seeing more of that bureaucracy that comes along with it. It can be a bit, I found it, my experience, to be a bit challenging with growing your career and developing because it is so structured and hierarchical that it's hard to advance if someone above you isn't advancing. And
I
so I
see.
find that it's easy to plateau and get stuck. And for me, I love learning, I love being challenged, and I need that consistency in whatever role that I'm doing to keep me engaged.
Okay, so it's harder to get a new role unless someone leaves. They're not just creating a bunch of new roles. Is that correct?
Correct. Like you might be able to move within a role, like levels within a role. And depending on if there's a vacancy, you can move into that role. But as soon as someone's at the top, so to speak, unless there's going to be a complete office restructure, which is usually not easy to happen within higher ed, you kind of get stuck.
Okay. So you're realizing I'm in higher ed, not going to have the growth opportunity that I want out of my career right now. What was your next step to figure out what's next for you? Because you'd been doing career coaching. How did you know what's the next move?
Yeah, so I again went back to that process of really reflecting of okay, what is it about this that I enjoy and I want to make sure that I'm able to maintain? And who is it that I want to do it for? And what I was wanting to do is see if I could somewhat create a new role, which is how I learned that creating new structure within higher ed is much harder to do. But I wanted to create a new opportunity for myself within the organization that would have allowed for me to really focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion type of work. And just as mentioned, it's just challenging to create a type of new structure. And so, because of those challenges, I thought, okay, well, it might be time for me to go ahead and look externally and look into other organizations. And that's essentially what I did. I knew that I wanted to have an opportunity to still support employees, people in general. I knew I wanted to have coaching elements, but I also knew I wanted that DEI aspect to be front and center for me, not necessarily in the background or something that I do additional to my work, which has always been my experience professionally thus far.
Okay, so you were carving out a totally new path at this point with the DEI work. And I know currently you're in that role. So you have made that pivot. How did you shift into DEI out of higher ed into this new space? Because I know it's something you're passionate about. You were doing the work in your role, but it wasn't your official title. So this is another example of you've done the work, you have the experience, but it may not be in the exact package that someone would expect. So how did you navigate that?
Yes. So leaned back on my prior experience of making kind of that first transition and utilized a lot of those same skills. So, or and experiences. So I started looking at job descriptions and looking at what is it that they're asking? Can I even do this work? And of course, there's a lot of overlap because with HR experience, let me put it that way, there's a lot of overlap with HR experience because you're dealing with people at the end of the day. You're dealing with people. And so I was able to lean on a lot of those prior experiences that I had in HR. I also leaned on the training that I received in my counseling psychology program for those in psychology or pursuing counseling psychology, you are being trained to basically be empathic and understanding and welcoming of anyone who would walk in your door. You can't choose
Yeah.
who that person is. And so throughout the program, we're doing a lot of multicultural, cultural sensitivity, other type of trainings in general. And so I've experienced that throughout my whole tenure in the program. So that was ingrained in me. The added benefit of being in higher ed is a lot of campuses continue with those type of trainings or provide those opportunities. So I continue to receive those trainings as well. And then, as you said, I've always implemented some type of focus, diversity related actions or work that I've completed in my role, in addition to my role. And so I just made sure that those were on the forefront of my conversations. Those were very clear on my resume. I had a section that showed all of the diversity committees that I've been sitting on, the trainings that I've completed. So essentially, I formulated a resume that showed I indeed, even though I never held the actual position, I had the skill set that they were looking for a DE&I specialist from all of my experiences.
Yeah, there's evidence. You had the experience, you've done the work. It's just the title was different.
Exactly.
So it sounds like at this point, you have a lot of experience with how to communicate your skills and how to communicate what you're good at to people who may not instantly see that you've done the work because your title is different or the organization was different. What's the biggest piece of advice you would give someone who right now is thinking about making a change? They've done the work, but they don't hold the exact title or they haven't done it in the exact way that may be expected.
I think I would say give yourself a little bit of grace. And by that, I mean, sometimes I believe we could be really hard on ourselves and potentially just very critical, more critical than what someone else would actually be. And understanding if you have the experience, you've done some work, you just don't have the title, then it's okay to craft your resume and your experience to align with it, the title that you are aspiring for, and speak as if you are one. And you can even say that. I've said that, like, I've been a DEI champion because I am, and I have been.
You have.
And so there isn't a reason why you can't call yourself that. You don't want to lie about, oh, I was actually in a position. Of course, you don't want to do that, but you can say, while I was in this position, I operated as such. And that helps people to make the connection. What I would often tell those who I coach is you have to make the connection for your audience. They're not going to make it for you. They're not going to think on your behalf and be like, oh, well, I'm sure that they meant to say this. And I'm sure that they're not going to piece it together for you. So you have to make it plain and simple. And so being confident in what it is you have, speaking as if you already are, really goes a long way.
I really like that phrase you used. They are not going to think on your behalf. You have to paint the picture, you have to tell the story, and really lead the conversation for where you want to show people that you've shown up in your career. You have to show them who you are and what you're about. And that is an art. That's truly an art. I call it an art because it's not a science. There's no one can give you a perfect script to make that work well. You have to just play around with it, practice, talk to friends about it, talk to a mentor. There's a lot of different ways. But at the end of the day, I think a crucial skill that all of us are going to have to learn how to do is what you're saying. You have to know how to communicate your skill set to anyone at any time. And I think even if you're not transitioning careers, that's just a good skill set to have.
I agree with that. And I often would try and tell, well, those who I coach that it really is about communication skills. And at the end of the day, you turn into a salesperson, even if you don't want to be. You are trying to sell your attributes, your skill set, the value that you bring, and make it clear for them. And sometimes students, for instance, will be like, well, I haven't ever been good at sales. And I would just help them to understand that I think people are good at selling what they believe in. So if you believe in yourself, you believe in your ability, then you can speak very clearly to someone else on, I know I can do this, and this is how I can do that because I've done it here and I've done it here. And I trust that I will be able to learn how to implement it in your particular environment.
Ooh, that's an important piece too. Believing in yourself. Like you have to believe what you're saying. You have to believe that you can show up in that new role, even though you didn't have the title, but you have the experience. Yeah, and then you get other people on board because I think it's naturally contagious when people are excited and they are confident in what they're doing. I know I can't help but get excited with them. I'm like, how can I help you make this happen? I want to be a part of this. I believe in you. Even if I don't know them that well, there's just certain people you can just tell they're going places because the way they communicate. So it's really powerful.
Absolutely. Yep. It's really a make or break situation. I've seen the transformation of someone coming in and, for instance, doing a mock interview and they're not as quite as confident. And you can hear it all throughout how they respond to questions. And then once they really become confident in what they can do and how they have done it, and they're confident in how they're going to talk about it, it's a completely different interview, for instance.
Yeah. And I will give this disclaimer because I do know, if someone's neurodivergent, that they might communicate in a different way. And
Mhm.
I do think that, you don't have to have some super charming charisma or show up in it one certain way for people to understand the good things about you. But what we're getting at is, yeah, it's that confidence is contagious. And
Yes, and I appreciate you making that disclaimer. I will share that I also worked students who, for instance, identified being on the Asperger's spectrum. And as you noted, their communication style was different, but it still came down to their ability to clearly communicate their skill set and the way that they best did so. And it still turned out positively for them.
yeah, so you're communicating in a way that's authentic to you. It's not going to look the same for everyone. I know me always say I do speaking engagements and as a speaker, I'm not the rah person to get people hyped up. It's not who I am. I do have energy, but that's just not my vibe when I'm speaking. I'm more like workshop style. So I think when it comes to the job interview process, part of that is knowing how you naturally communicate, what your style is, and playing to that because that's when you're going to show up powerfully. If I try to show up and be rah person, it wouldn't even fit. It wouldn't look right.
Exactly.
It's not me.
Exactly.
But
Exactly.
if
You
that's
want
you,
to be
great.
yourself.
Yes, yes. So, however you show up and whatever that looks like, I think there's room for it. And thankfully, these days, organizations are much more aware of the differences people have and how to embrace those differences.
They are. And I will just say, if they aren't able to see the value that you can bring and you brought your authentic self and you communicated clearly, then that's okay too. I've been in an internship interview where I knew I was clearly communicating my skill set. I knew what I could do. I was using everything, driving all of the conversation. Well, not all, but making sure I was clear with what I can bring and the value. And they still decided no. And I had to be okay with that. And it ended up working out well because I ended up in the right place at the end.
That's a good point. You can do all these things well, be a great candidate, have great skills, and you will still get told no. And that's okay. Not everyone is going to be for you. You're not going to be for them. So that's important to not take it too personal and see it as more of a fit decision versus a personal, you're not worthy decision.
Agreed.
I appreciate you, Rhea. This has been a great conversation. Before we go, I do want to ask, is there a great way for people to keep in touch with you?
Yes, by all means, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. You can find me, I think my LinkedIn literally is just LinkedIn and my name. And so you can find me there. And that's probably the best way.
Okay, sounds good. And I will include that link in the show info. Thank you all for joining us today. And thank you, Rhea.
Thank you.